All right, so welcome to our second Flourishing by Design, or FxD, special interest group meeting. This is in association with the Human Flourishing Program's Flourishing Network. My name is Jenna Mikas. I'm the founder and host of our fledgling FxD group. It's a beautiful morning here in Melbourne. It's a joy to see you all, and welcome wherever you are and whatever time zone and date it is for you. Always fun coordinating that. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands upon which I now live, work, and make, the Wurundjeri people. I pay respect to their elders, lores, customs, and creation spirits, and I recognize that these lands were never ceded. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Matthew Lee. I'll provide a more detailed bio in a few minutes, but I wanted to start by emphasizing how Professor Lee, or Matt, is really the reason that we're all here today. Not only is he the founder of the Human Flourishing Program's Flourishing Network, he is also the person who suggested that I create this group to begin with, back when I was advocating for the necessity of design in realizing flourishing. He appreciated the perspective and the need and really helped make it happen, so I really appreciate that. 1 year later, we're officially on the Flourishing Network website and getting things underway. It took a little bit of time. So with this background in mind, I thought it would be appropriate to have Matt be our first guest speaker to build on some of the foundational flourishing knowledge shared last month during our kickoff meeting and to inspire us in our work going forward, as he truly is a lovely human with high caliber yet relatably resonating work. So as for how we plan this next hour or so to go, 50 minutes after my snafu, I'll spend the next couple of minutes providing some background. After that, Matt will speak for about 15 minutes before fielding questions until maybe 45 minutes after the hour. And then after Matt leaves, we're going to probably conclude with one set of breakout room discussions before going through next steps. So last month, we primarily captured info about group members before discussing some flourishing scholarship, the history of how our group came to be, and plans going forward. If you weren't able to attend last month's kickoff meeting, the link to the recording has been shared for those of you who are registered. Please just contact me directly if you need help locating that. So I shared our last meeting slides with Matt before today's talk, so he'd be familiar with what we'd covered by ways of flourishing scholarship to date. What he will primarily build on today are the background slides that we discussed last month, some of which are shown. Those that explored the Human Flourishing Program's 5 central domains of human flourishing, the roles of positive psychology and well-being science-related models in flourishing literature, and some of Matt's shared thoughts in different forums, such as the Flourish FM podcast. As you may remember, it was there that he said that flourishing goes beyond well-being. It's multidimensional, intersystemic. It's about being well and doing good, growing in goodness, and serving as a pathway and an outcome, or a journey and a destination. So without further ado, I'll introduce Matt by way of his bio. It's very impressive. So Professor Matthew Lee is a research associate, a member of the Global Study of Human Flourishing research team, and director of the Human Flourishing Program's Flourishing Network. He is professor of the social sciences and humanities at the Institute for Studies of Religion at Baylor University, and a distinguished visiting scholar of health, flourishing, and positive psychology at Stony Brook University's Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics, as well as a visiting scholar at the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital. He previously served as chair of the American Sociological Association's section on altruism, morality, and social solidarity, and as president of the North Central Sociological Association. His current research explores topics such as well-being and flourishing, benevolent service to others, and the integration of social science and the humanities. Welcome, Matt. I will now stop sharing my screen and will spotlight you so you can have the floor and share your slides. So beautiful. Yes.
Okay. I will start the clock. I have 15 minutes. This question about design and designing for love and designing for flourishing is really important. So I'm glad that this group is taking this on. I'll just say a few things, and then we can have the fun of dialogue. First of all, before saving the world, first fold our own laundry. And so I always like to do a one-word check-in with groups, but we're a little bit behind schedule, so I'll just acknowledge that normally I would just say in the chat box, put one word about your current emotional state. What are you feeling? And then if there was something, that we needed to attend to, like a really negative emotion, we would take that time. And that seems to be very consistent with this neurosequential model that Bruce Perry and others have developed, that suggests that before we can get to reason, we have to regulate ourselves emotionally. We have to check in with ourselves and ground ourselves. And then we have to relate, and then we can begin to reason more fully. So if we're not connecting with ourselves and connecting with others, we're not going to be in a position to make, really wise choices. And so I always like to have a bit of a grounding moment. And I take this question from my friend and collaborator, Jim Ritchie Dunham. What is my specific contribution to the creation of a vibrant space of trust and to our deeper shared purpose? So whenever a group convenes, we can always ask the question, do we have the kind of trust with each other to begin to do this work? And have we clarified our deeper shared purpose and how each of us is making a specific contribution to that? So we can just take a moment to think about our purposes designing for flourishing. And we all have special gifts, and we all have an opportunity for dialogue. So maybe just reflect silently for a moment on this question. So offering that kind of space to check in with ourselves and check in with our purpose and check in, do we have a space of trust that will enable us to do this work, is itself an act of love in service of flourishing. I've noticed that there are lots of critiques of lots of design practices and processes. The latest that I've seen is that design thinking misses the mark. And it says here that design thinking's failed to deliver on its promise to solve the world's thorniest social challenges, but there's a solution. Adopting a critical design stance can help designers serve communities rather than their own methodology. I say, of course, critical design stance is very helpful. It may not get us all the way to solving the world's thorniest challenges. And so will that be enough, or is love required? And as I've been doing this work on flourishing and related topics for a number of years now, I'm increasingly convinced that it must be grounded in love. And so then, what does love mean? We have very limited time, and so I'm down. It says 15 minutes for provocations, but I'm down to 11 minutes. Before we move to our 25 minutes of what I hope would be mutual dialogic flourishing, where we are flourishing because of the way that we are paying attention, being present to each other in a dialogue. And so when we think about, what would be these provocations, we could say in this moment, what does love require? In our work outside of this moment, what does love require? We could be asking that question. And there's a school, this is in the book, Mind Shift. A school asks this question in their staff retreats. What does love require of us? And then the question then goes to, how is love available? If love is requiring something of us, how is it available? And that's the design question. Have we designed so that love is available so that we can be responsible to love? And then how am I expressing sacred hospitality, which seems to be really central to the integration of love and flourishing, and to me suggests that love is the essence of flourishing. And I have a book chapter coming out. I'm told the book will be in production in October. It's called The Future of Education. It's being published by Oxford. And I'll talk about Bill Pearson later in the talk. He and I have written this chapter called Love is the Essence of Flourishing, and it's about kind of the future of education grounded in love. So what is love? Well, there's been a lot said about it. And again, in these short provocations, I'm not going to give you something definitive, but Iris Murdoch nudges us in this helpful direction by saying love is the capacity to see. It is the liberation of the soul from self-preoccupied fantasy. It keeps attention fixed on the real situation. So I like that a lot. And in the latest issue of Humanistic Management Journal, which I co-edited with a colleague in the Netherlands, the special issue is devoted to love and meaningful organizing. I've got a couple papers in it as well. And in one, we try to give a sense of what love is. And we say that love has generally been understood as a feeling or a noun, but it too is also an action, a verb. But more than this, a complete understanding of love includes many parts of speech and constituents that promote flourishing for self and others, arranged with practical wisdom according to a unifying grammar in a manner that signifies a life-affirming story. So love is a grammar, it's all the parts of speech, and it's the life-affirming story. In other words, we say love is aimed at the promotion of flourishing for all without exception. And this is in a chapter on love in a business organization with 12,000 employees and factories all over the world. So, what could that possibly mean? Like, what are we really talking about here? Just to make it like really concrete, we can think about Dame Cicely Saunders, one of the key founders of the modern hospice movement. And you can see the sort of shining eyes on this hospital patient as Cicely is holding her hand and looking into her eyes and expressing non-verbally what she felt in the depth of her being, which is that you matter because of who you are, and you matter to the last moment of your life. And we will do all that we can, not only to help you die peacefully, but to live until you die. And that's really what love is all about. We help each other live until we die because we matter, because we are who we are. Now, many of our social institutions and buildings, our architecture, it's not designed for love. So this is a reimagining of the Tate Modern Art Museum in London. And I've been to this place. And in its current design, you can just sort of ramble around. It doesn't matter what floor you start on. It doesn't matter where you end. It's kind of just a jumble of experience. There's nothing formative about it, except it's kind of corrosive in terms of becoming a better person or a more loving person. So imagine, as the author of this book, Artist Therapy, did, imagine if we designed art museums to take visitors on a healing journey instead of a chronological journey. We would start with the gallery of suffering and then move up floor to the gallery of compassion, and then the gallery of fear, and then the gallery of love, and then the gallery of greater self-knowledge. And there would be this kind of developmental arc. And a lot of people will say, well, that's not what art museums are supposed to be about. Yeah, but what institutions in society are about that? I think a lot of our educational institutions reflect a rather scrambled developmental arc as well. So imagine if the social and physical design of art museums and other social institutions, the design itself loved people into being by moving them through a formative regenerative process from this kind of suffering, brokenness, separation to wholeness and healthy relationships amidst difficulty. It's not pushing suffering away, but it's sort of figuring out how do we live in a flourishing way with suffering. So that's a provocation for us. When we think about schools, they tend to be modeled, the design tends to be modeled on that of the factory, even like a 19th century factory. So you see these schools, and it's like, where's the love? Like, how is love available in these kinds of spaces? And yet there are some schools that just meet outside. We're not going to have a building, or we're going to be very minimally involved in a building that separates us from the beauty of nature. Or this is the school that was redesigned after the Sandy Hook shooting to be a beautiful place, to be, instead of like sharp box, you can see the flowing curves, almost like water, built into the architecture. So it is possible to to create spaces that allow us to be more responsible to love and to make love more available to us. I have spent some time with this community called Trilith, located right next to a studio also called Trilith. It's the biggest movie studio space in the United States and second biggest in the world, just outside of Atlanta. And they have these, they have this intentional design for the community right across the street from the studio. There's a studio, a community, and there's a foundation, the Trilith Foundation, that tries to promote the software, the kind of social side of what it means to be in a community to match the hardware, the built environment. And you can see in the biggest picture here, one of these pocket gardens. So the homes are very close together. Nobody has their own yard, but you're supposed to have these intentional collisions in these pocket gardens that are nestled between the houses and apartments. And they try to have a diversity of income requirements. So there's a lot of different kinds of houses and apartments. But the idea is that you'd have these intentional collisions, but you can't just throw people together. You have to give them the software, like a new operating system. And so you see in the one image here, people really enjoying their time together. And it's because they have this sort of motto that they're trying to infuse into the culture. You see the neon sign here, be well, do good together. And this is me and one of my colleagues from Baylor University holding the slate, as they call it, at the end of filming for a documentary. And, you know, this, and they have like on their cups, be well, do good together. And so, you know, we're trying to bring together this new urbanism, but infuse it with heart and soul so that the software matches the intention of the hardware. And so we're telling some stories in this documentary about what it means to love each other into being in a community that was designed for that, and a community that's designed to help creatives who are working in the film industry across the street be healthy and flourishing so that they can tell healthy and flourishing stories, which is not often what we get. So again, intentionally designing so that the space enables us to be responsible to love and makes love available to us so that we can then make that available to the world. When we think about designing for flourishing, we can think about the Teal organization. Some of you probably know this framework from the book Reinventing Organizations, but oftentimes we might personally want to be at the green or teal level, but we're stuck in the orange or the yellow, or even, you know, power, fear, and chaos down in the red. So, you know, how do we design for wholeness and higher purpose and an evolutionary purpose, for deeper shared purpose? There are some examples. There are some really important outliers. It's not normative yet, but they have designed their buildings and they've designed their culture. A lot of times they've designed the buildings, but not the culture. They've got the hardware, but not the software. So you've already had a little background into flourishing. I like to summarize it this way by looking at these lemmings running off the cliff. And one says, hey, I've really improved my subjective sense of well-being recently. And the neighbor says, that's great, but where do you think we're going today? So are we going somewhere good? Are we on that developmental process of the reimagined Tate Modern Art Museum? Or are we just sort of bumbling around through a bunch of you know, random exhibits, maybe chronologically arranged exhibits? I'm going to kind of skip through this because I only have 1 minute left. But I would just say that we've got an interdisciplinary journey. We've got a network, which you're all part of. We've got the Flourishing app. We've got the development of a dialogue process globally, the Global Flourishing Study. And then in my latest book with a couple of friends, we talk about transcending crisis by attending to care, emotion, and flourishing. So we're trying to sort of ground our understanding of flourishing in something that is caring and loving and really nurturing of flourishing for all, not extractive, not going somewhere bad, but going somewhere good. I'm nearly out of time, so I might just say, you look at this picture, you say, I know where the flourishing is, but maybe it's not as apparent as you think. Maybe the question is, where are people most alienated from self, others, nature, and the sacred? Maybe there's a fair amount of people in this luxurious high rise that are quite alienated in these ways. And when do people feel fully alive and empowered to care for each other? Or when do they feel, in the words of one student in a very well-funded school district in Silicon Valley, where do we feel like lifeless bodies in a system? So I alluded to Bill earlier today. Bill Pearson and I have written a chapter titled "Love is the Essence of Flourishing," and it's in this book on the future of education. And he noticed, and you can see the dots here, these are his students on this chart. He noticed that many of his students were burned out or were unwell relative to the national average of medical students. And so one social design is to say, well, this is your job to weed out the weaklings. But that's not the way Bill sees it, because every person has value, just like Dame Cicely Saunders said. And so he created a space where the students could love each other more fully into being on this developmental journey. And then, he was able to measure and celebrate the results. So you can watch these students walk from the bottom right to the upper left just after one semester. And you can see his students there laughing and smiling. Bill's wearing the dark suit. So I do think it's possible to design for love to promote flourishing. The question is, what are our spaces like, and what's the software to match the hardware? So I think I'm out of time. I think I might skip this one, and just note that in this special issue, which I just showed you, there's an article that I've co-authored with Jim Ritchie Dunham, who I've mentioned earlier, simply titled "Love in Action." And the subtitle is "Agreements in a Large Microfinance Bank That Scale Ecosystem-Wide Flourishing, Organizational Impact, and Total Value Generated." And you can see some of the measures that this microfinance bank is using for its clients, the 80,000 surveys we received back from the clients, and then thousands of what they call collaborators, the co-workers, the team members. And they really want, they want everyone to flourish, but how do they even know if they're flourishing or not if they're not collecting any information? So we have to measure what we say we treasure, and it's an act of love to do that, and then to say, what are we learning from these measures, and what do we need to change in our built environment and in our social environment to make love more present so people can flourish? All right, that was a couple minutes over. I'll apologize for that, but I didn't quite get through everything, but I think we have enough to have a real dialogue on how flourishing and love are sitting with you right now in terms of your own work, in terms of the design work that you're doing in the world to promote flourishing. And I welcome the conversation. So thank you, Jenna, again for the invitation, and thank you all for listening.
Yeah, of course. And hopefully you didn't feel too rushed, Matt. I know that we had talked about 15 minutes, but it always goes so quickly, right?
I always have more to say than I think. So I never get through my slides, which is okay.
I know, I love it. You're very prolific. I love it. I always have lots of slides and try to cover a lot, and I definitely feel that pain. So, no, I appreciate that. It's so many beautiful quotes I was trying to jot down and things like that. So, I'd be really curious to just see what people want to ask. Let's maybe open the floor up. So I've provided notes into the chat saying there are 3 different ways I'm capturing questions. It would be via chat, via the Q&A function of Zoom, and also with raised hands. So hopefully that should all be doable. I think I have
And
all the
it's
settings.
also fine to just have a moment of digestion.
Of course. Yeah.
if
Let's
people need
digest.
if people need a moment before they want to chime in, it's okay to just be.
Exactly. No rush. Okay, it looks like Shima has raised a hand. Let me go ahead and I'll unmute you or ask you to unmute, and then you can unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I am very happy to be with you tonight. I'm connecting from Marrakesh, that's from Belgium. And I was almost sleeping, but I had this notification, so I'm very happy that I didn't sleep and I joined. I really feel grateful to be here because, in fact, 10 years ago, I finished my PhD titled Mindfulness Engineering, and it was my second PhD, and it was a crisis I had, that I realized the discipline of engineering has become very soulless, so I wasn't really sure that if it's something that I wanted to do. And I shifted to kind of a different topic, and I basically had this idea that we need to design with attention to more contemplative practices that would allow us to really design with the spirit of love, as you put it in your presentation. And I saw that the attitude to my PhD was not as well receiving as I thought, because I think before going to design with love, we need to actually transform ourselves. I think that is the prerequisite for that. Transforming ourselves from inside, and then also creating not only business models, but also impact models. And I think these are two things that I discovered that are quite complex. And then later on, I wrote a book, Mindful Smart Cities, in 2020. And now I'm writing my second book, bringing principles of Sufism into design. And I see, again, the same thing, that perhaps the question is not the therapeutic dimension of design, but the inner transformation that we need to be on, and what is an institute is ready for that? Do they provide this internal transformation opportunity or not? And I think for me that is the main concern. And again, to keep it very short, I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that we can continue this conversation, and hopefully at some point to be able to present also my work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm happy to offer a few reflections. I think what you're saying is very important. I was just talking with a group yesterday, and they were talking about a very large building, and there's no place for anyone to go for contemplative quiet. Like, if we want to do the inner work, where do we go? Because there was a time where people had their own offices, and then there was a fad about putting everybody in this loud room for collaboration and other things. So for some kinds of work that makes sense, but if that's all you have and there's no place to go for quiet, how do you sort of get grounded, or how do you do the inner work? So I think it's a design problem in that sense. But so that's the hardware problem, but it's also the software problem. So in a couple weeks, I'll be hosting an event at Harvard with the Inner Development Goals Initiative. And this is a group that has been surfacing kind of like what are the most important inner development goals that all people, all organizations, all countries should have. And they've come up with 23, maybe it'll go to 25 at some point, but to try to get people oriented around the fact that this work is really important, and we're not going to attain the sustainable development goals unless we've done the inner work. And so the IDGs connect to the SDGs with the idea that you need an integration of the inner and outer development, and we've neglected, again, through our designs, by not having spaces where people can do the inner work, and creating work timetables where there's no time for that anyway. Everybody's sort of like always under pressure. So the first thing that goes is contemplation. But the busier you get, the more you need this inner development and time for it and space for it. So I applaud what you're doing and fully support it. And it's going to require an operating system upgrade societally and globally.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
one of the questions from the chat? I saw that there was something about, Amy raised a question about how you find the language of love being received in a business and academic setting. It's not a word the dominant culture uses much in the settings. Does it take some time to soften people to consider it among the usual commercial academic priorities? You know, when I, years ago, probably coming on, you know, close to 2 decades ago, several universities ago, I wanted to teach a class called Sociology of Love. And some of my colleagues sort of laughed about that. Oh, what an unserious academic topic. You can't study that. Like, it's all poetry and there's no way to, you know, I think poetry is good, by the way. You mentioned a Sufi approach, and I remember one of Rumi's poems on love. He says, "The way of love is not a subtle argument. The door there is devastation." So yes, like the poets have something to say, but there is a science of love, and there are interdisciplinary initiatives like the one that I'm co-leading at Harvard on the construct and assessment of interpersonal love, that are bringing scientific rigor to this, but not in a way to reduce love to science. I mean, love transcends science, but science can give us some clues and poets can give us some clues. And so, you know, I would say that, you know, I started teaching this class, and, you know, some of my colleagues were, you know, sort of making fun of it. And then the students were transformed. I mean, I would say that the students transformed each other by the work they were doing together, because, you know, the class was not a lecture. And so a lot of times, you know, when I started teaching at Harvard, I said, I don't care how big my class is as long as I can move the chairs. Don't give me fixed theater seating. We've got to get in a circle. We've got to get into small groups. And of course, I walked into my classroom and it was theater seating. So the design did not, so we had to go outside sometimes, and we'd go out in the light rain even in order to escape that design. So, so the word love is not well received, but partly because it has been confused. And so the way we use the word love, and you can ground it in, you know, Aristotle and Aquinas and other classical sources, it's to will the good of the other. And, you know, that sounds a lot like flourishing. And so flourishing is the outcome, and love is sort of the journey, the process towards flourishing. And, you know, so the article I wrote, which I alluded to earlier, one of the articles I wrote in this journal was with a senior leader of a company called Barry Waymiller. And the CEO, I always keep these books handy for talks. So I've got Bob's book, which is Everybody Matters, Bob Chapman and Raj Sisodia, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family. So he prefers the word care, and he finds that that gets more traction with a business community. And he's been very successful in promoting that. Brian and I said, let's go for love. Let's see what happens if we use love. Because I think love gets at something that's more than care. Care is part of it. You know, we have this book on transcending crisis where the word care is in the title. But care only gets us part of the way towards, you know, the shining eyes in the hospital patient that Cicely saw. There's more than care going on there. That's, you know, that's a genuine love. So, so I continue to find hostility, resistance, etc. But it doesn't matter, because there's a kind of early adopter that really likes it and wants to lean into that and says, oh, I didn't know you could use that word. Now I'm going to start using it and bring some clarity to it. Instead, you know, I started out as a criminologist. My first half of my career, my focus was murder. Why do people kill each other, and what are the causes and consequences of murder? You know, when you think about love in murder cases, it really just means uncontrollable passion or uncontrollable caring or cathexis, investing emotions in other people. And so you have jealousy and control, and then ultimately escalation, violence, and sometimes death. That has nothing to do with love. You know, passion might be in the service of love, but passion by itself is not love. So love is, you know, again, for lack of a better shorthand, to will the good of the other. So I just keep beating the drum, and others like to join in the music, and then I'm ridiculed. But you know, that's you know, that's okay. You know, you know, if it's your truth, you can't not do it. That's what Parker Palmer says. I like that phrase. So anyway, probably
That makes a
long-winded.
lot of sense. Thank you. It sounds like you made your way through it in academia by kind of grounding it in science. And I'm guessing in a business context, is it similar where you sort of use some of the language that's existing that people already care about and
Well,
connect it to that?
brilliant. And I would say the last slide that I didn't get to, I have a quote from the article that Brian and I wrote, and it's Brian's quote talking about his experience in this for-profit company, which has been enormously financially successful. And he says, I'll just read the quote, "What we've learned over several decades is that when love is present in the workplace, it creates the most nurturing environment for flourishing." So profit is a byproduct of creating a space where people want to be hired and they don't want to leave. And meanwhile, a lot of your competitors, they don't really want to be there. They're trying to leave. A lot of them do leave. And so, you know, when you invest in love, you see all these side benefits, and you know, profit is one of them. So yes, if you can find a way to demonstrate, and it's the demonstration that matters, it's not just the rhetoric. You have to show that there's practical wisdom in leading with love and designing for love and making love available. And then you see the outcomes. It's like, okay, you know, we want those outcomes and we're not getting them with our unloving design. So what if we start designing for love?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's beautifully put. I really liked that Tate Modern example you provided, Matt, about loving people into being through design. I think that's really beautiful. And the fact that you mentioned Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, I was actually going to mention that because there was an Arthur Brooks interview recently about happiness and love, and specifically talked about collaboration. And we always talk about our virtual cultural kitchen here with FxD. So
yes.
Thank you for
well,
that.
and one, I'll read the other quote from that slide too. This is from Peter Senge, who wrote The Fifth Discipline, which millions of people have read, professor at MIT. And he's talking about Hewlett Packard and he, you know, and the technical innovation that came out of Hewlett Packard's printer division. And he says, and this is the quote, "I'll never forget that group of Hewlett Packard engineers and managers talking in the most matter-of-fact way about love, not as a romantic sentiment, but as the utmost practical truth about what they knew to work in their work." So the technological innovation comes from the vibrant space of trust that love creates among these engineers and managers. If you don't have trust, you might think, if I come up with a creative idea, I'm either going to be ridiculed for it or somebody's going to steal it. So I might as well just keep quiet. But when you have a network of loving relations, and some of these networks extended beyond the company, it wasn't just employees within Hewlett Packard, but they shared information, they trusted each other, and they cared about each other. And so in that kind of space, you're out of the pain center of the brain and into the joy center. And that's a much more creative place to be as a human being.
True. Now we do have a few more questions, Matt. Are you okay to continue? And then is everybody else okay if we go maybe 10 minutes over today?
Yeah, I'm happy to continue.
Okay.
I like talking about this, as you might notice.
Okay, great. I'm just going to go by timestamps between chat versus Q&A. So Sarah Backhouse, you had a question, Sarah. Did you want to ask that, or should I convey? I should probably unmute you to enable you to answer.
Okay.
There
Okay, I wasn't able to unmute myself. Now I can.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matthew. That's been a wonderful presentation. I'm an architect, and I find the term love, and I also have a Master of Applied Positive Psychology, so flourishing is my thing. But I do find that the term love can be challenging to put forward as a design proposition. So I'm sort of interested in your thoughts as how we can embed love as an acceptable design language, particularly within my profession. And I suppose coincidentally, I'm doing some research into architects' own well-being, and the key things that have come out of that for their own flourishing has been well-doing and love for themselves, and actually doing the work they do because they want to help others flourish. So I think that there's a potential link, but there's an acceptability disconnect at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's right. And sometimes just having the wisdom to know what can be received. If you care to work with groups that aren't quite the early adopters, and for many of us, that's where we find ourselves every day. So sometimes when I'm working with groups, I won't say anything about love, but I'm sort of intentionally nudging us to discover that word. And I'll say, well, what do you think describes this space of trust where you guys really do seem to care about each other, and you seem to be very creative, and you seem to be laughing when others are crying, and the sky is falling everywhere, but you seem to be protected a little bit. What do you think's going on there? Someone will volunteer the word love. And so when we think about how we communicate, I think the words are meaningful, but we can convey love without words, and then eventually it's just sort of inevitable that some people will say agape or something because they don't like the word love. Love sounds romantic or something. But the fundamental problem, and I think Martin Luther King Jr. solved it very quickly and very simply, and he got it from some theologians that he studied with, is that we disconnect love from power and justice. And he said very famously that power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. So that's it. Just, carve that into the doorway of every building, and you won't make the mistake of thinking that somehow love is disconnected from power and justice. The love that does justice is powerful, and power without love is going to be, as King put it, abusive. And we see abusive power everywhere, and abusive power is designed into the fabric of our civilization and into the buildings. So we don't have to necessarily always use the word love, but I think if we as a culture did not disconnect love from power and justice as we generally do, I think it would be easier to use it. But it is interesting when people like Peter Senge or Brian Wellinghoff or others are saying, look, this is the best word we have to describe what we're experiencing, at least in English. And in other cultures, they have multiple words. So again, the Greeks had agape and, storge and all these other things. So, at the end of the day, love is willing the good of the other, promoting their flourishing, being with the other in healthy ways. And who wouldn't want that? So again, it's just because we've misused the word love for so long and tried to make it do so many incompatible things.
Yeah, that's been very reassuring. Thank you, Matt. And I think in my interviews with architects, these themes of social justice and have been very overwhelming, talked about. And in me reflecting back to my interviewees about there being a love component, they've actually embraced it. So I think the joining the dots can happen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we've had some interesting conversations too in the chat. Like Nushin mentioned about using the nuance of compassion, and Veronica asked the difference with kindness. And I will get back to Yoko.
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to
Yeah.
show you what that is. So I should note that while I was still a criminologist, I became the vice president of something called the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. And my friend Stephen Post is the president, and he's got this book on dignity. And I'll just show this one page because this is sort of how we're thinking about it. And you can see love is at the center and compassion is one of the spokes. And so there's, carefrontation, compassion, helping, celebration, listening, all of the creativity, all of these modulations of love, because you can have clumsy compassion that's not very loving. So if the signal of love modulates the signal of compassion, then it becomes more effective. So some of this is really just how we choose to use language. But I like the way that Stephen understands love to be sort of the center, and all of these things are sort of modulations or manifestations of it. Love is the encompassing construct. And I think our compassion is better when it's loving. I think our care is better when it's loving. Well, what do you mean by love? Willing the good of the other. And creating a beloved community, designing for a beloved community in which everybody's loving each other more fully into being. So that's a debate. I won't say that you have to agree with that, because people, I think there's a separate call we could have to debate that. But I find that helpful. I think it's helpful to think of love at the center, and these things are expressions or modulations of love.
Great. I may ask for a snapshot of that picture later, Matt, for us
Yeah,
to maybe
sure.
follow up and
I
reference.
usually
if you
use
don't
it in my
mind.
slide decks. I didn't put it in this one.
Oh,
so.
come on.
Well, and even like Stephen will tell you, like unlimited love, like what could that, is that like the hippie, free sex of the 60s or something? No, that's not what we're talking about. It's something that suggests that if I want the good for myself, I should want others to have their good too. And that's the difference between flourishing and well-being. I can extract my well-being at your expense, but I can't extract flourishing. It ceases to be flourishing the moment I'm trying to extract. So I think that's the sense in which we say that whatever we want for everyone all the time. So this is, Jim Ritchie Dunham, who I've mentioned a couple of times, he talks about E cubed, everyone, everywhere, every time. And if I want something for myself and I don't want others to share in that, or to have that freedom or that autonomy or that ability or that capacity, then it might not be the best, most virtuous value or thing that I could be focused on. So it's a real strict test of whether we're doing something that actually is promoting flourishing, or whether it's just another form of extraction, performative flourishing versus genuine flourishing. And again, I think you can see this in the architecture right away. There's a great quote by a former school principal who said that schools are spaces with very few soft surfaces, and they're getting more angular and knife edged all the time. And that's why there's this reaction, like, let's bring some beanbag chairs into the classroom or something, so we can at least have some curves to go along. You see the Sandy Hook building, it's like flowing water. It's not this angular box stuff.
Right. Yeah. And since we talked about some of those examples last year, there's been a lot more interest in education and healthcare, just to get into that. And some of the conversations we've had, even with Susan McSalmon, who's going to speak to us in November with Intentional Spaces Summit, we've touched on that.
Well, if
All
you
right,
want people to heal, why would you have them look at a view of a brick wall or a dumpster? If you
Exactly,
want
we
to
already
heal
know.
from a serious surgery, maybe a tree.
Exactly. And of course, the literature proves that. So,
Right.
Yoko, you are next. I had unmuted you. I think it times out, but I think you can unmute yourself now. It looks like it's fine. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Yoko Kawai. I'm an architect and I teach spatial concept of Japan. And I'm trying to figure out the way to create the space to make people mindful without the practice of meditation. So that's my background. And my question may have come from the fact that I'm from the Eastern culture, in which love or something similar to love is understood from the different perspective. But my question is, could you talk, or the request is, could you talk a little more about the connection between the self-knowledge or self-management and flourishing? I understand that we need a kind of, my understanding is that we need a kind of self-transcendence or mindfulness to truly listen to others, which you said that it's the requirement for love or the definition of love. How does this self-knowledge or management does on one's self-transcendence or the mindfulness?
That's a great question, and I would love to hear your definition and explanation of love as well, and see how it might relate to what I'm putting forward. You know, when I think about how I have been an instructor in the classroom, if I used to walk in, I was teaching about murder or some topic, and I would walk in and we would just start lecturing, and then I would do Socratic method and make students feel very uncomfortable and call on them and put them on the spot and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, that's what I saw and that's what I experienced. So I thought it was normal, and it was normative in a statistical sense, but it makes no sense in light of our just physiology. So if we want to make everybody amygdala hijacked, that's a good way to do it. And there's a few people who love it. They will thrive in that kind of container. You know, if you've got 25 students, 5 of them will love it. And 5 of them will think this is the worst thing, you know, you could experience. And then a lot of people will just be apathetic because, you know, we haven't yet understood whether we're still distracted by the fact that our significant other just broke up with us right before we came to class, or we're worried about lunch is coming up and I don't have any money for lunch. And so, you know, we saw it at the couple universities ago that food insecurity was a big deal, and that was not, you know, that was not part of the training of being a teacher in a classroom, is to understand that people have, they're bringing concerns about the past and the future into the present moment. So how do you get grounded in the present moment, and how do you soften this kind of amygdala hijacking so that the prefrontal cortex can start doing its work? And then the question, Ian McGilchrist writes very eloquently about this, like in his latest book's like 1,500 pages, or 1,500 pages long, The Matter with Things. But he talks about, like, we've oriented our social institutions in the image of the left brain, and we're not inviting the creativity of the right brain, or the love, or the unlimited love that tends to be encouraged by right brain processes. So it's really just a matter of recognizing the reality of our physiology and saying, how do we work skillfully with that, or how do we just bumble through life, assuming that what we're saying on the stage is being received by the learner. And, you know, we call that teaching, but there's no learning going on. In order for there to be learning going on, we've got to work with our brains and get out of the, you know, the sympathetic nervous system kind of default mode and into the parasympathetic. And the only way to do that is to begin to practice, as you're saying, a kind of self-understanding, self-awareness, ability to regulate our emotions. And then we start relating to others. And from that place, we can begin to transcend the selfishness of the ego. It's really hard to do that if we're in fight or flight mode, because we've been amygdala hijacked before we even got to class. And now this professor is using this very harsh Socratic method. You know, and I went through that, and I remember as a student, I could have answered the last 10 questions, but now the professor's posing something directly to me, and I just don't know. And it's not okay not to know. And so, you know, I felt, you know, very abused in that circumstance. And then I went and did the same thing. So when we started, and that's why I said, like, we've got to have a circle. Don't give me fixed, you know, bolted seats in theater style. I've got to move things around, because the only way I have found that students really engage and learn deeply is if they can connect personally with each other. And I'm sort of the coach. You know, I'm not the Trilith, the school at Trilith. I mentioned the community Trilith earlier. Their school, they don't have students. They won't refer to them as students. They are heroes of their own journey towards flourishing. And how do they become heroes? Part of it is, if you want to go sit out on the hammock and just be quiet, You can go sit and just swing. There's a lot of autonomy. They've really, and I saw Jenna in her slide deck had mentioned the self-determination theory. You know, you've got to have belonging, you've got to have competence, and you've got to have autonomy. And they give their students a lot of autonomy, a lot more than I had. And the built environment is conducive. They don't really want you in a classroom the whole time. They want you exploring the woods, go walk the trails, or go contemplate while you walk, or talk with a friend. Sometimes just moving and talking is more creative than sitting still at a desk. So anyway, I do think that you're onto something. And I think mindfulness practices can lead to the self-regulation and then the self-transcendence as we find our deeper shared purpose. But if we're all emotionally triggered and our spaces are emotionally triggering us, then how are we ever going to get to self-transcendence?
Yeah, I love the triggering mention and having kind of the negative aspect take. And I think I'd mentioned even a year ago when you and I first talked that designing for self-determination theory really enabled that experience for designers, like what Sarah was sharing that she's found with some of the architecture community, is that you start kind of having those own feelings of flourishing or love or whatever you want to call it, when you even have inclusive design approaches and you have that intentionality and respect behind the praxis.
Well,
So,
and I loved what you said right there, because we can call it love or we can call it flourishing, or we can just say there's something about this experience that helps me to feel fully alive.
Yeah.
And, you know, we want that for everyone, everywhere, every time. And we know that's not the case. I mean, you look at globally, the engagement percentages are very low. Most workers are just not engaged. And you know, you look at how that plays out in education. In kindergarten, elementary school, they're highly engaged, like maybe 8 out of 10 in the surveys. And then by middle school, it falls to 6 out of 10. And by high school, it's 4 out of 10. And the only group lower than high school students are the teachers. It's like 3 out of 10. It's like, all right, so our system is designed to get disengagement, burnout, and apathy. And so why is that? And why do we want that? Why do we keep, as I heard Otto Scharmer say this one time at the Presencing Institute, I'm doing some work with the Presencing Institute. Why do we want to collectively create results that nobody wants? And why do we keep doing that? How do we get unstuck? So that's
the
the
definition of madness. Yeah. There we are, repeating bad behavior.
But you
right.
all can change it, because you can bridge the gap between this beautiful talk and this nice slides and all this stuff, and go out and design a world where it just makes it easier for people to flourish and easier for people to connect and to love each other into being.
Yeah, that's so important. So we have probably two final things. One had asked that I share something for her. It was about phygital spaces, kind of the physical and digital elements. So she had put it, do you think that the general frameworks for flourishing can be the same between in real life spaces and digital spaces, especially if those digital environments are civic spaces, have a focus on well-being and systems health, not typical encouragement of engagement or prevalence metrics? Or do you see there as being a foundational conflict between online and offline models?
Yeah, that's a great question. I much prefer, generally, I much prefer in person, face to face. But that being said, I was really shocked when I took my love class and put it online. The course evaluations went up. And it's because the students could be in breakout rooms without me monitoring. I mean, that's one reason. Like, they could really get to what they cared about without worrying about what old man Lee might have wanted them to say. So I think there was some authenticity. I think there was some autonomy in those breakout rooms. And then the same thing happened at Harvard. I was teaching a course for the sociology department called Conflict, Justice, and Healing. And I was really adamant that being together in person was really important to kind of attend to each other at the level that we would have to do in order to move, towards justice and healing. And then COVID happened and we had to go online. And again, I saw the course evaluations go up. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. So It's not my preference, but it really works for a lot of students because, again, I think they're doing things like we would have a discussion board instead of like just asking questions and raising hands in class. And you could really think about it, and you could post something, and then you could post a response to the response. And so I think there was something about that rhythm that took us out of the 50-minute class space and just sort of opened things up. So I think there's advantages to each modality, and I think that there's great value in hybrid approaches, or being very thoughtful about when we use one for a purpose and we use another for another. I think people who are only in digital spaces, I think there's something tragic about that.
No, I
And
think
I
it's
know
important.
that we
Yeah.
do need like collective effervescence within a group when we're together, and that's also part of just working with our physiology.
Right. It's like the crystallized intelligence and
Yeah.
layering models. I think that's so
Yes,
important. And
that's right.
yeah, those of us who teach definitely understand the digital communication nuance. And I think Luan was talking a little bit too, I think, about digital physical spaces. So maybe augmented reality and virtual reality, but that's still something that's being interrogated.
I'm not an expert in that. I've had no experience with.
Yeah, I think even the experts are still trying to figure some of those things out, I would say. But one final question, and then we'll let you go, Matt. Really appreciate your time. Nushin asked something that I think would be good to end on, which is about teaching the next generation. So to teach this to our students in architecture school in general, where do we start? Any tips?
Well, I would walk in and read the whole poem that I started from Rumi. I've got it memorized, so I'll just recite it.
Oh, wow.
The way of love is not a subtle argument. The door there is devastation. Birds make great sky circles of their freedom. How do they learn it? They fall, and in falling, they are given wings. So, I could go in with scientific studies and neuroscience, and this part of the brain lights up, and I will, that's useful. But I think if we really want to inspire human beings as whole people, not as the chaplain at Harvard once said, Harvard tends to treat students like their brains on a stick, or maybe like neocortex on a stick, not even the whole brain, and maybe not the right brain at all. But I think that's changing. That was some years ago. I think there's been some change there, but I think we can offer whole human beings a way into this topic that is it's a little bit mysterious and a little bit challenging. Like, oh, my left brain can't really comprehend that, but there's part of my right brain that seems to be on fire right now. What's that all about? So like we're peering into the mysteries of life here. And then like science can help us shine a light on one corner of that, but we don't want to reduce everything to parts of the brain lighting up or what we find on a survey or something like that. So I would say the most important thing is the inspiration and the intention. And then you can find the resources. But what it required for me is to unlearn all of the unhelpful things that had been designed into my environment, so that I could say, oh, it is the job of a sociologist to read a poem by Rumi at the beginning of the semester, rather than coming in with, Durkheim said this and Weber said that, and now there's, the critical people. And so, all of that is useful, but I do think that we can just start with what makes us become more fully alive, and then we invite others into that, and then we are energized by what's lighting them up. And I had a student at Harvard who would come into my office and say, what's lighting you up today? And I always thought, I never thought to ask anybody that question, but now I'm empowered to begin asking people that question. And it's different than what's wrong with the world and what problems are we trying to solve. This problem solving mode puts us right back in the pain center of the brain. And so I think Rumi opens us up for a deeper experience. And then we can say, well, what does the science mean when we really dig into the science of flourishing? So I wouldn't throw the science out. I'm not advocating for that, but there is a way to integrate, but find which things are really energizing for you. That's I'll end with a quote on the big yes. And again, from my friend Jim, he says, before you start, you find yourself getting excited. After you spend time in your yes, you're even more engaged, more committed, more excited, more passionate, and wiser. This works when it's challenging and full of adversity, if it is yours to overcome in your yes. So I would just put that on everybody's, refrigerator or, computer screen or whatever, and just say, are we living into our yes right now? Or are we being trapped by someone else's no?
Oh my
So
goodness.
do it your way. It won't be wrong if you do it your way.
No, that's so fantastic. I love the living into your big yes, and also the Rumi quote, the sky circles and free falling. I almost want to rename the group Sky Circles and Free Falling. It should be a song. So anybody who wants a side project. Well, thank you so much, Matt. This was wonderful to have you here. It's definitely went longer than we anticipated. I thank you for your time. We tried to be cognizant of it as you and I were planning, but
No, I always figure that you have a plan, and then you allow. It's like Jurassic Park. Life always finds a way. The dinosaurs will get out. Can't put love in a cage. It's gonna break out. So we broke out a little bit, but it was a great joy. Thank you.
We did. Yes, we were embracing the discomfort of not being regimented, and it was beautiful. So I appreciate that. Thank you for coming, for joining us, and we'll go from here.
Bye-bye.
All right. And thanks everybody for being flexible for the conversation. Hopefully you found it interesting. I always find Matt to be very inspiring. All right, so sharing now, hopefully that looks good. I'm gonna bring up chat so you guys can yell at me if something looks wrong. All right, so I'm not going to do the breakout room. Mainly the thing that I was going to talk about was have everybody just consider how designing for love relates to flourishing by design, and maybe note some key takeaways, lessons learned, inspiring comments, things like that you noted from Matt's talk. So rather than going into breakout rooms, let's just go ahead and capture that within the mural board. So encourage a little bit more collaboration there, if you will. So to do that, I have all the talks on the right side as we've been organizing these. So content on the left for everybody to still collaborate on, as well as things on the right. Rather than sharing slides, because of course I'm not going to always have speakers' slides going forward. Instead, I'd like to maybe capture some output and reflections on the talks. So I've created this area off to the side for Matt. I'm going to plop in here just maybe a snippet showing those questions I was going to ask in the breakout rooms. And then perhaps people could just engage and put Post-it notes there with their thoughts, answering those two questions. So if you could just go in there and add thoughts after today's session, that would be lovely. And with that in mind, let's talk through next steps. So first, I want to talk about engagement. I'm afraid I scared people a little bit last month with the rules of engagement. Those were really meant to just encourage collaboration done respectfully and true to our collective aim of flourishing in practice and praxis. However, I think it may have curbed participation a tiny bit. So yeah, please just get as involved as you can in some of the different modes of communication that we're supporting. And so to date, that's been via LinkedIn and Miro. I wish I could accommodate everybody's preferences for different platforms, but for now, we're really just trying to keep things simple. I am still doing email as needed to either just provide notices and reminders about the upcoming meetings or to provide the recordings after the fact. So I'll probably just continue doing that for now, since I can't really make the LinkedIn group private truly, unless we make it truly private and nobody can even search for it or find us. So this way we still kind of protect some of those elements of our engagement as we've discussed. So if anybody does have suggestions on how communication could be done more seamlessly for me and for participants, please do let me know offline. In the meantime, I'd like to see more interaction on LinkedIn if we can via the group, maybe even emulating what some of the other special interest groups do, like Flourishing at Work, for example, is pretty good about doing casual interaction. So I just thought I would show a little snapshot of that. They're another special interest group. I know LinkedIn can be seen as snooty, self-promoting, but I think we can infuse some casual, playful interaction there while maintaining professionalism. So please share articles, papers, conferences, whatever that might be of interest to the group. So I'm not the only one posting there. That would be lovely to see. As for Miro, we have had some activity, but not as much as I had hoped by now. So with that in mind, I'd like to request that you all access and add to the Miro board as soon as possible by our next meeting in October at the latest. That meeting will serve as a working session for us to build out board content and finalize our group mission. And that mission content is in these horizontal purple lines here. So you can get into some mission, vision, values information there. As an aside, while there is structure to this board, it was only meant as a starting point. So I'm really open to people adding new content outside of those identified sections. This is really meant to be a collective group board. So please add things, even stream of consciousness content as desired. And if you have any problems with Miro or are unfamiliar with it, please watch a few tutorials or reach out to me if you continue to struggle. I'll do what I can to help. A few more quick updates and notes about the Miro board. Last month, I discussed some potential spin-off activities projects that might result from group collaborations. I'm still curious to learn which of these might be of interest. In the meantime, I wanted to share that I'm going to be exploring the compilation of a book with chapters written by participants sometime next year. Apart from that, I'm sharing other new things like conferences that arise, including the Inner Development Goals Summit that's occurring in October. I'd like to see others adding to those sections too, but I'll keep putting those there as they come up. If you're wondering where to put those things within the Miro board, this activity-related information can all be found in this middle section. So please add to these squares here with ideas, comments, etc. Next, in terms of identifying speakers, I've really just been trying to incorporate speakers that either were responding to the survey that I did in June for some of the early people who had signed up to the group, as well as just areas of interest that people had expressed individually to me. But I do want to keep it open so that we can identify themes that people want to hear more about, or maybe specific speakers, or talk about projects that are really noteworthy. So please jot those down as well via Post-it notes or even just, pasted images at the bottom here. You can put examples on the left and possible speakers and things like that on the right, including to self-nominate if you want to help to lead conversations. So for now, this is the general 2024 plan I've tentatively outlined as a starting point. Next month, I'm thinking that we build on the Miro content together, nailing down our group mission and ambitions so that we aren't distracted by presentations, etc., during a meeting. Then in November, we'll have Susan McSalmon, co-author of Your Brain on Art, which is an excellent book. She's going to be addressing the group before determining our plan for December. In December, I'm thinking of either doing another working session or possibly having a speaker on Indigenous philosophy, whom I'm coordinating with. So we can discuss that more in that next October session. About October, given that we haven't been able to really interact much live as a group, I'm thinking of hosting a workshop in October rather than having speakers, as I said, and perhaps even doing 2 workshops on the same day to accommodate the different time zones. These would likely both occur October 10th, my time, 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Melbourne time. That way we can accommodate a bunch of different preferences and at a minimum get some content into Miro as a group. If you can't attend either of those sections, please do put your content into Miro beforehand, or just let me know if there are certain things that you want called out and risen to be something that we discuss as a group so that it's represented before we meet. So November's meeting will be at an unusual time for us based on Susan's schedule. It's not at the 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. Melbourne time I've been trying to keep to, alternating people for the time zones and being able to accommodate preferences. But we are accommodating Susan's preference and availability because she is, of course, quite booked out. I have no doubt this is going to be an excellent talk given Susan's book and addresses that I've heard her give to date. So hopefully I'll be able to see you guys there in November. And from there, we can learn more about not only the importance of art in design, but also the criticality of creating community as discussed last month, really elevating FxD as a virtual cultural kitchen. So I, for one, am really looking forward to that. So that's all I have for today. Thanks everybody for your time and attention. I'll stay on in case anybody has any questions. And I can do the quick unmuting just to make sure that everybody can actually communicate if they want to. Okay. All right, reach out if you have any questions. Otherwise, everybody have a great day. Good to see you. Bye-bye.